So, having had a full morning, and before we break for lunch, we have an exciting conversation. So, we have seen, all of us, I'm sure, we've seen plenty of articles and plenty of hot takes or not so hot takes on threats and lessons learned during the pandemic. But this panel is special, not just because it involves a range of specialists that I respect and look up to, but also because Lucian Constantin, senior writer at CS Online, will probe them with questions that aren't always easy to answer. He's a great question asker. He's always been kind of one of the most active, involved, and focused people in the community. And I'm very pleased to welcome Lucian with me here on our virtual stage from our comfortable chairs. And I'm really excited to follow this panel and learn from it as much as I can. Welcome, Lucian. You are on mute, unfortunately. It had to happen. It had to happen. Like,
sorry. Okay.
We have to align with, like, it's in the ethos now.
Thank you, Andrada, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. Nice to see you at another DefCamp. Unfortunately, not in person this time. So, as Andrada said, my name is Lucian Constantin. I'm a journalist who has been covering cybersecurity for various international publications over the past 13 years or so. Some of you might know me as a DefCamp regular. For the past 3 years, I've been a senior writer for CSO Online, a publication covering cybersecurity with a focus for an enterprise audience. I'm joined on this panel by Tudor Damian, an experienced IT consultant, certified ethical hacker, and a Microsoft Cloud and data center management MVP. I'm also joined by Cristian Sândescu, founder and CEO of Coda Intelligence, a cloud-native attack surface reduction platform designed for MSSPs, and by Lukasz Ștefăncu, a malware researcher with over 10 years experience and a focus on Android malware research and security. Lukasz, I hope I said your name right.
Yes, hello, and you said my name correctly.
So the topic is threats and lessons learned during the pandemic. I wouldn't say many of the threats are new as much as the old threats are acting in a significantly different context and landscape, and that is obviously driven by the widespread and forced adoption of remote work that companies have had to face and deal with, which has led to accelerated digital transformations, and has changed the way the local network perimeter is perceived, or rather, it's hard to have a local network perimeter when all or most of your employees are no longer working from inside the local network or office branches. It's safe to say that early in the pandemic, many companies scrambled to implement work from home with a focus on business continuity and not necessarily on security. This meant opening remote access ports. It meant allowing employees to work from their personal non-company managed computers because maybe they didn't have enough machines to give to all of their employees. They tried to scale their VPNs only to find that the hardware VPN gateways or concentrators were unable to cope with the much larger traffic and number of concurrent users, and various other issues. So, Damian, you are an IT consultant, and I assume you've advised many companies that had to deal with this. What is your take on this? How have they progressed? How have things progressed since then, since the early stages when everyone kind of rushed to put something together that just works?
First off, hello, everyone, and nice to see you and hear you again, Lucian. Yes, we've dealt with the main impact of this very early on. We've seen a lot of companies struggle to, rush, as you said, rush the whole digital transformation initiative. They all had something going on. They all had something in mind. They were all kind of prepared. Like, they were using VPNs before, and they had some work from home policy where a few people a day, a week, a month would work from home, they were not prepared for everyone working from home. That's for sure. So the initial impact was a strain mostly on their resources, their available bandwidth, their available staff to address all the potential problems. We've seen companies struggle with their IT staff not being able to keep up in helping everyone set up their home VPN connections, for instance, and things like that. Not having, say, enough licenses on their devices to allow that many simultaneous remote connections and things like that. So it was a hard lesson for a lot of them because they simply couldn't do their job anymore. Even though technically they would have had the setup in place, they didn't plan, and nobody really planned for that. So the first impact was a major shift and rush to make everything work in a way that maybe they've tried before, but on a smaller scale. Then the next wave of challenges, I think, was around how to better protect all those devices that are now connecting to your Wi-Fi at home, which is probably not the most secure network out there for most people. And that suddenly became their work network. And a lot of companies didn't have the tools and methods to properly check for those devices being safe, those devices being up to date before they connect to the company network. At the same time, people were browsing on the internet, doing their personal stuff on their home Wi-Fi, and then using the same device to connect to the corporate or company network, while having maybe an infected computer. And that launched a lot of attacks that appear to have originated from the inside. And there was a growth. I think it was about 25% of reported attacks last year originated from inside the company, from inside the network. It doesn't mean that the company had people that had bad intentions and they were trying to hack their own organization. It's that their accounts and their devices got compromised, and that led to these attacks happening from, if you want, the inside, because those people and those accounts had access to company data and company information. So I think that was another major shift, and I've covered this in a bunch of other talks at some other conferences, looking at the trends. The inability for companies to consistently detect those insider attacks was another issue. Usually having that traditional approach where everything is like a castle and moat security, where we're here on the inside, the company network, the company data center, and everything here, all the devices we own and we control. So everything is safe and everything on the outside is not. When that changed and suddenly all those devices were on the outside of the castle, like beyond the moat, beyond the walls of the castle. And suddenly all those devices had to connect and had to access the data. So being able to detect whether that's a malicious user posing as a legitimate user, or it's actually a legitimate user doing something on a Saturday at 3 a.m., that was very hard for a lot of companies. Accelerating that bring your own device approach also caused issues, and it's a challenge that I don't think many companies have solved completely, even right now.
I want to get back to the actual issue of detecting some of these attacks, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. I know, Christian, you work with MSSPs, right? And I know that small and medium-sized businesses in particular have a very hard time with exactly what Tudor was saying, which is they lack the resources. Obviously, working from remotely has made it hard for security teams in general to respond to attacks, but also small and medium-sized companies didn't necessarily have the budgets or the talent, the number of security team members to deal with some of the sophisticated attacks we've seen, like ransomware. So many of them have kind of oriented themselves into offloading that work to MSSPs instead, right? Is that something you've seen? How have you seen the market there develop? Have you seen growth? And yes.
So that's that's several facets to the question that you asked. So back to what Tudi was saying a couple of minutes ago, I think what he explained is that it was hard for the enterprises, right? And it still is. It still is a challenge. If we're now looking lower into the SMBs, I think for them it was probably even harder because they didn't have all the processes in place before the pandemic. They still don't, most of them. That's why we see so many successful attacks recently. They don't have the budgets for sure, as you very well said. They are relying mostly on MSPs to do the work, and those MSPs aren't all the time. They don't all the time have the security in mind. So that's the difference between MSPs and MSSPs is that it's a fine line. I've seen MSPs being really interested in progressing towards MSSPs recently. That's an important trend, but they don't have the resources to do that by themselves. Most of the MSPs in the world are small, medium-sized businesses themselves. They don't always have their security teams in place. They have mixed roles where IT people get some security responsibilities, but they're not particularly trained for that. And they have their own challenges in acquiring and making sure they have the right resources in place to tackle with those challenges. On the other hand, we've got the attackers, which brought APT down market. So we've got now APT as a service. It's a pretty common thing to happen. And therefore, we haven't seen that many APTs very targeted like they used to be in the past years. We've seen them spread a lot, no matter where the target is. So they're not that niched, they're much more widespread. And they're looking for really low-hanging fruits that they can exploit. And it's extremely easy to find those all over the place, unfortunately. The duration for patching is still pretty high, especially in SMBs, and especially with those people working from home. So not all of the traditional controls are working effectively anymore for a lot of people due to those VPN constraints and stuff like that.
I would say, I'd say everything is an APT these days, right? There's been a shift in threat models in recent years with the commoditization of APT-style attacks and techniques, whether this happened because of hackers working with government-backed actors and taking some of those techniques back into the cybercrime world, or just cyber criminals learning from all the reports and all the techniques, because at least financially motivated cybercrime used to be focused more on stealing money, not necessarily on stealthiness and long-term compromise and data exfiltration, which that has shifted. We have most of the ransomware groups for the past few years are manually operated ransomware groups. They work with affiliates who compromise the network. They use manual hacking, lateral movement techniques, fileless execution, credential theft with the goal of gaining domain credentials, domain admin credentials, and then they deploy the ransomware on the most valuable systems or all the systems at the same time. And it's usually a very customized payload for that particular organization. And this is very APT-like, right, if we are to think in the past. And whereas in the past, if you were like a hospital, a small clinic, if you were maybe an attorney's office or any type of small business, you weren't necessarily the target of government-sponsored cyber espionage, right? But you now have to face, and your defenses were adapted to what you were facing, which was general malware and that sort of thing. But now you kind of have to deal with this much more sophisticated attacks that require additional products, visibility, logs, what Tudor was saying, basically. You need a lot of visibility to deal with these threats, right? And going back to something that he was saying is the insider threats. And the insider threats are not only your employees being compromised and then lateral movement being performed from their devices or their accounts, but we've seen recently and in the past few years, MSPs being targeting themselves. So the supply chain or the services, digital services supply chain, where the MSPs have been targeted in order to reach their customers, right? Because it's an easier way than to compromise individual companies. You target an MSP and then infect all of their customers, right? And that seems to be a trend. And it kind of seems that companies have a very hard time winning, right? On one hand, in order to deal with the sophisticated attacks, they went and contracted out MSSPs or MSPs to handle their cloud infrastructure because they've switched to cloud services and that sort of thing. And now those MSSPs and MSPs have become an insider threats to them. What do you think the solution is there? Is there no way for them to win?
There is for sure a way to win. They're always there. It's been here for a long time. It's just that it's hard to do it. So people kind of avoid doing the hard things that need to be done. In my opinion, that's cyber hygiene. Those, MFAs, stuff like that. A lot of the MSPs that were compromised, they were doing poor hygiene on their own networks and their own infrastructure. Actually, in terms of the Msp Kill Chain, I would say this has actually started before the pandemic. We've had the first major breach in 2019 September, so that was actually before we went into the pandemic. So hackers found that these are, hack the keeper of the keys and you have the keys to the kingdom, right? So that was it.
Sure.
Then
what I'm saying is it's not, obviously most of these threats are not new, and they, supply chain attacks have been going on for a number of years. It's nothing new. The issue is now the pandemic kind of accelerated companies adopting or contracting MSPs, and now you could say the threat is higher because there's a larger number of potential victims out there, or the risk is higher, right?
That is 100% correct. However, I think that the migration to the cloud and the migration to MSPs, although it may be a little risky on the short term, as you put it, right? It's probably the way the market is consolidating right now. So I don't think SMBs have had or would have had chances by themselves to deal with this. And I think there is a higher chance of them being properly protected if they work with the right MSP, and if they understand that they need to increase the budget that they're allocating. I mean, just paying for the basic M365 or G Suite or whatever that is it's not enough. So they need to adapt that. Moving from the office to the home, to the new model, actually requires them to make some significant changes to the way they treat ID and in general, and of course, making sure that cyber is dealt with in depth, and having not just tools, because it's easy to buy tools, but having the right people monitoring those tools and actually taking action in case an attack happens. The reaction time, the incident response is extremely critical in how you deal with that, and the length and the impact of that attack can be highly controlled.
So what you're saying is careful selection of your MSP and MSSP, basically, asking those questions, right? how does your security program look like? Do you perform regular penetration tests? Do you use multi-factor authentication? How can we log your access that we are giving you into our network? And do we have those logs for traceability and forensics investigations later on if something happens? How can we limit your access? Right? I've seen organizations who give out company-managed enterprise or companies-managed machines, laptops to their outside contractors, right? And you are only allowed to access the network from those machines, not your machine, not your company's machine. We are giving you out this laptop, and this is the laptop you have to use to access our network if you need to perform certain things. So I would say I would like to move back a little bit into the threats, and Tudor was saying that all of those when we were talking about devices, and most people tend to immediately think of laptops, that sort of thing, that companies had to work from home, but we also have mobile devices, right? And probably with mobile devices, this is a bit more widespread because many companies allowed employees to use their personal mobile devices before the pandemic as well, as part of your bring your own device policies. But this has also accelerated. So I want to ask Lukasz, what are some of the trends there that you've seen during the pandemic? Have the attacks against mobile users increased? Have you seen anything that's been trying to piggyback on the pandemic? Have you seen some APT groups or other groups that have adopted Android malware who maybe were not using Android malware in the past?
COVID-19 threats on mobile or Android platform were spotted instantly when pandemic started, since the bad guys or threat actors saw a huge opportunity, since if we recall what happened back then, no one knows what is happening. Everyone was locking down. There was a lack of information on what is happening in your country, all around the world, and the bad guys exploited that. We've seen a distribution of Android malware through fake websites, text messages, emails, where, for example, these websites try to impersonate coronavirus trackers, government applications that would point you what you should do in the case you have any symptoms. Coronavirus symptoms identifiers to the application. Afterwards, compensations applications were created by your government for some states, register for vaccine websites and applications that would lead you to download malware. And since we need to stay connected, either with our colleagues or with our friends, family, there were also identified and found fake malicious Zoom applications, which their goal was to spy on others. And talking about the threats, actually, I have seen all of them in a short span period. There were spywares, either open source spywares or off the shelf that were already on the market, and also new ones that were developed and spread during the pandemic. Ransomware, file encrypting, requesting cryptocurrency, SMS worms. Adware, the most popular based on our data, was the spread distribution of Android banking Trojans, which goal was to lure, to steal credentials for banking, cryptocurrency applications, credit card details, etc.
Okay. There's another trend that I want to bring up, and that is the rise of cyber mercenary groups. And by that, I mean cyber criminal groups that have ventured off into cyber espionage, hacker for hire, pretty much. If you think of the affiliates, in the case of ransomware groups, they work with affiliates that provide or do the hacking for them and provide the access and that sort of thing. Some of these groups are also selling their services on the open market, and not only to potential government agencies, but any competitors, anyone who wants that intellectual property, anyone with a grudge, extortionists, and so on, which again, like with ransomware, it expands the scope of the threat or the scope of companies and organizations that would have to deal with this issue, and individuals. And we've seen cases with such groups that targeted small 3D modeling companies that work with international architects on projects, that targeted law offices to get access to some legal documents. So these are not big enterprises that work in the defense space or the traditional targets for APT-style attacks, right? And some of these groups are also known to use mobile spyware, right? Have you seen an increase there? And also, when I'm talking about individuals, I'm talking about maybe high-profile individuals. We've seen the C-level executives of certain companies being targeted, but not only them, also their immediate families as well, for various reasons by these groups.
Correct. Since using your smartphone to spy on others is, in my opinion, the best way, since we are carrying it in our pockets. It's connected to internet in many cases for many users, 24/7. It's always on. You have, in my opinion, all the personal information there, all stored credentials, credit card, connection to your work, VPNs, etc. So this is the best way how to snoop in and steal some data, to start cyber espionage. And there are two point of views, I would say, that I've seen during last year or so. And the first one are Trojans, spywares, and remotely administrated Trojans that were distributed through underground forums. There was a lot of them, since they actually don't sell their source code, but provide their services for others, which means they are the ones that have all the information, if you think about that, not the ones who rent it. And many of them, since also, there were a couple of these spywares that went public with their source code, and based on the open source code that was highly sophisticated, were created new branches of new spywares that were being used in the wild. That's the first case. The second one, I would say companies that were using exploits, as you suggested, to target high-profile individuals, managers, CEOs, journalists, etc. We have heard a lot about that in the last couple of days, but I don't think it's connected directly to the pandemic situation. However, they use spywares the same as the ones before. Well, not the same, but the same functionality, since their goal is to spy on the victim, snoop on their communication, on their social media, take pictures, recode phone calls, maybe even extract credentials to get access to other systems that they have access, photos, and so on. The difference is that this spyware is not using any exploits. They try to gain access nearly by being distributed through, let's say, phishing, through fake websites, etc. Others that use high-profile exploits, 0 days, in many cases, 0-click exploits or chain of exploits that would escalate privileges to root and stay persistent with their malware, and afterwards communicate with the server, with the owner now and then.
So what would be your advice there, both for these high-profile individuals who might be a target for various reasons? And I'm not only talking about business executives, but as you mentioned, journalists, activists, human rights activists, political dissidents, people who are usually the target of such attacks, but anyone who can, analyze what they're doing for work or in their and realize that there are some groups who might be threatened by their actions, right? So they might become a target themselves. What do you think they should do? Because it's very hard for individuals in general to protect themselves from well-resourced attackers with a lot of time on their hands and sophisticated tools and techniques, right?
Yes, it's nearly impossible to protect against the attackers that have infinite number of resources to target these high-profile individuals. And when we talk about zero-click, zero-day exploits, there is no way to protect against that. Otherwise, if we talk about standard spyware that are sent through social media, through phishing, through emails, I would say stay up to date. And also in case there are new systems, new updates in your system, either you are using iOS or Android, always stay up to date with your apps as well. Since we've seen this is zero-click exploits in popular social media and instant messaging applications in the past. Stay up to date. Don't click on every link you receive. Make sure to verify who sent that to you. That's not super simple. Download apps only from verified sources, which means official app stores. And in case to be extra safe, if you believe you might be targeted in the future, I would suggest to use security solution, trustworthy security software that is up to date, should protect you against the phishing links and the malicious binaries.
Okay. I would say overall, based on my coverage over the years, I've seen the Android ecosystem is still very fragmented, but things have improved in quite a bit from back in the day. Would you say it's still important to choose a phone manufacturer that has commits to regular security updates, either monthly updates or quarterly updates or something like that, so at least you know, and to certain support periods for devices, for certain, because sometimes with these phones, you are unsure as a user when your phone will go out of support, whether you'll get the updates immediately. Google is very good at issuing monthly security updates, but until they trickle down through all the vendors and all the firmware updates and all that, and then the high-end models seem to be more prioritized by the vendors than their mid-range and low-end models. So would you advise users investigating a little bit what different phone manufacturers offer in terms of security updates and the commitments they've made?
This is also important for end users, for employees, and also for the high-profile people, that even the different OEMs, there's a lot of them these days. Many of them provide super cheap smartphones, and their layer above the Android, I wouldn't call it like that, creates another opportunity for the bad guys, for the exploits being delivered in a place. So I would suggest to stay with updated smartphones, as you just said, that have as least as possible additional binaries from OEMs, from vendors, to have stock Android, which is fully supported with updates, with monthly security bulletins, and the system updates as well, not to actually give your employees the cheapest smartphones and think that they will use that for 10 years and not expect that something might happen in the future. So some breaches, for example.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to shift back to remote access, because I think that's the primary generator of this increased threats that we've seen during the pandemic, or increased problems, right? And it's many companies have shifted towards the zero trust network access concepts, where since we no longer seem to have a network perimeter, or no one's inside the network perimeter anymore, since VPNs don't seem to scale very well, then it's important that we treat everyone, whether they're outside the network or inside the network, the same, and the focus is not put on the location of the device or the employee, but rather on the user identity, the device identity, device security posture. And we have all of these vendors that have come out with zero trust network access solutions now, where the majority of them, I would say, are for web-based applications, like basically linking your internal web-based application to the outside world in a secure manner, where you have this access portal that users have to go through. But also there's zero trust network access that supports other protocols and other different type of applications and not just web-based, right? Tudor, what have you seen in this space? Have you seen more companies adopting those? I know Cloudflare has a solution. Google came out with a solution after being one of the early adopters of zero trust. They've finally launched the product. There's others. Akamai has one. Generally, I think like all the content network delivery companies that have a lot of servers around the world and can support this type of activity have provided. I know there's Duo Security. They got acquired by Cisco, and so on and so on. So there's many options out there for this sort of thing now for companies. Have you seen companies shifting towards that instead of trying to scale their VPNs, for example?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think it's the only real solution to the problem. Just scaling your existing solutions, which don't cover the exact problems that you mentioned, will not be enough to protect users, to protect companies from that. And actually, in my session later today, I go into a bit more detail on how the whole zero trust approach is handled. So I do believe that it is the only efficient solution right now that we're seeing out there, the shift towards zero trust and the zero trust methodologies and philosophies and solutions. And there's indeed a lot of them out there. And it is also a matter of finding the right one for you and figuring what's enough and what you actually need to implement. It's not just, hey, you use this technology and this will fix all your problems. That's never been the case. But it is all about verifying everything explicitly, not just making sure that a specific user has access to your network. It's about making sure that that user has access to a particular application on a particular server at a particular time of day from a particular device, and checking for all those things, making sure that those things are something that you validate constantly, and that any sort of behavior that doesn't match the regular patterns is flagged, and you get some form of alert or response, automated response to it. Looking at implementing a full-scale least privilege access as well. Don't give everyone access to everything. If you're connected to the VPN, you basically have access to everything. If nobody checks whether you actually need access to that particular server or that particular application once you're on the VPN, that's where the problems start appearing. I've not seen a lot of companies implementing, for instance, the assume breach approach, thinking in the lines of not how you can prevent from getting hacked, but what if you've already got hacked and now you've been hacked for 2 months? How would you be able to detect today that you've been hacked last week? What is it that you need to do differently to find that, hey, there's something weird going on a server or in my network? And that's something that, as an approach, we've seen it's harder to implement. And another huge topic,
basically internal threat hunting is what.
Yes, some form of internal threat hunting, looking for indicators of attack, indicators of compromise, looking at those things that would show you that there's something going on that shouldn't be going on in your network. So there's a lot of solutions there as well. Just look at things like, I know, dark trace and similar stuff. The other point that I think a lot of people and companies, big and small, are missing is the human component. No matter how much technology you throw at the problem, there's always going to be that part where you need to educate your users. And I think that's also where a lot of companies are still failing. And having that insight, giving people that sort of basic knowledge about how their home Wi-Fi works and why this solution, this VPN is different from the other solution we've been using last week, and how that impacts you, maybe personally, giving them just the basics of how your phone should be secured and why those monthly patches from your vendor matter. Giving people the info about that, I think that's also, or should also be, part of the discussion, and it's kind of missed, where everyone just focuses on what sort of technology and what sort of I don't know, best practice should we implement now.
Right, but do you think that companies have actually chosen zero trust network access, but are still kind of treating it as external versus internal, in that they needed a solution and VPNs didn't scale, so let's do this. Let's use this solution for remote employees to now access the internal network, but they haven't really applied the same concept of zero trust on their internal networks. And there should be no difference there, right? The same principles you apply for the external connection should be applied for the internal connection. Something on the network should not be able to just access anything or connect to access everything or connect to everything on the network. And it goes beyond just traditional network segmentation, where you put certain number of servers in a more critical segment and others in other workstations in another segment, right? It's about access to applications, it's machine-to-machine communication, it's everything that you just mentioned, those granular policies of who access what from what device at what time and for what purpose and that sort of thing, right? So would you say that's a component and that also basically helps with the mentality shift that you mentioned, in that, okay, I'm trying to defend against attacks, but let's assume I've been compromised. So what am I doing internally on the network so that if I am compromised, the impact is kept as low as possible? They don't manage to access everything just because they managed to hack into George's computer, or they managed to access the VPN gateway either using stolen credentials or by exploiting a 0-day, which we've seen. There have been alerts from CISA, from the FBI about attack groups exploiting 0 days in a number of VPN appliances and products over the past year. So it seems a very common attack vector. Would that be your advice for companies applying those same concepts internally? So when you think of zero trust, don't just, okay, you've dealt with the remote side, but now apply it to your internal network as well.
Well, as I said before, I do believe that the traditional castle and moat security is dead and doesn't apply to the modern environments anymore. So any company that still thinks like that will have issues regardless of what technologies they start implementing. And it does go back to that mindset shift that you also mentioned. It does go back to the way you look at things and the way you actually make use of the technology. It's not just about going to the cloud because it's cool and everybody's doing it. It's because it's going to help you, and how it will help you, and how it will affect your internal processes and the way you do business every day. And as long as people fail to make that jump, to change that mindset, no matter what technology you throw at the problem, it will never be enough, and it will never solve your actual issues. So yes, I do believe that the mindset is important and not just the technology. And yes, we are still seeing, and I'm still seeing myself, and there's all the reports and all the data breaches that are still out there with companies saying, but hey, we've done zero trust and we've still gotten hacked. Well, yes, but if you read between the lines and you look at how you got hacked, at how the data breach occurred, you'll figure out that you are still doing things the old way, and you were just making it appear that you've changed something when you didn't really, in fact. So it's also about the behavior that needs to change, and it's also about the users understanding these concepts. And it's not about inside or outside anymore. Everything could be on either side, and you need to account for that, and you need to check for that, and you need to protect against that all the time, everywhere, on all devices, all the users, and so on. So yeah, it's certainly the way you positioned it.
I want to mention here another trend that has been accelerated by the pandemic, or companies trying to think long term about the new status quo, basically, because it's safe to say many employees will maybe never return to work from the office in the same numbers as before, right? And there's this new SASE and SASE, for those who do not know what it is. It's an acronym for Secure Access Service Edge. It's a term coined by Gartner. And what it is the combination of SD-WAN with cloud-based security, where the idea is taking all of these hardware appliances, whether they're networking appliances or they're security appliances, out of local branches, office branches, and the corporate network, and putting those same features into the cloud. And the only thing you need is basically for all of your traffic to go through the cloud, all of your office traffic to go through to the cloud. You do not longer need this complicated network setup, right? And we've seen various companies, various vendors starting to go in that direction. There's companies like Cloudflare and others that come more from the networking side of things or the CDN side of things, and they want to basically become your corporate network backbone. You say, link all of your branch offices to us, and then you can apply the traffic policies, the firewall, in the future, data leak prevention, everything else from the cloud. Instead of managing all of these local appliances. There's other vendors that come more from the security side, and they're maybe lacking a little bit of the networking side, the SD-WAN part, and they're signing partnerships together. So it's not, the idea in the end would be simplification, right? Having just one vendor for everything. But it's also a shift for security teams, because it means no longer, and IT networking teams and IT teams in general, you no longer need to focus on managing devices, managing appliances. You are more focused on defining policies and applying those. Have you seen, interest in that? Gartner estimates that, a large number of companies will adopt that or already have plans to move in that direction over the next few years. By 2025, they say over 60% of enterprises will have an explicit strategy and timeline for SASE adoption, encompassing user, branches, and edge access. And that will impact, obviously, the MSP market as well, and the MSSP market, since it's kind of a direct competitor. If the cloud vendor replaces your need to have a security team, sort of, it's more focused on defining policies rather than other things. How do you see that, Christian?
Well, I actually think SASE is here to stay. I think it's a logical solution to what we've seen so far. I think MSPs are, especially the ones that are, thinking more into the future and having, a more robust cloud adoption, cloud integration strategy. They're extremely welcoming that. There's an education that needs to happen around zero trust and around SASE. And for them, in order for them to be able to position that. But I think, at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about the MSP market and the SMB market, it's really about not helping the customers make the right decisions. So being able to impose a minimum security stack, I think that's critical for the success of the collaboration on the long term. So if you're an MSP and you allow clients to go around and buy packages that, for example, don't include the minimum building blocks that you consider to be necessary to ensure that customer security, what you do is you put yourself and the customer in a position that is, going to probably lead to some heavier discussions down the line when they get breached. So I think that's an important, establishing this backbone and saying there is no way around security. So coming back to SASE, I think, whenever you do something from scratch, it's easy. So whenever you promote a new solution, it's easy. Dealing with investments in hardware, for example, and migrating from the old landscape to the new landscape, that's where challenges are appearing. And most of them are, related to the mindset, to the investments already done in those, in those devices, people training, all of that. So, yeah.
Okay. I'd say there's obviously some limitations right now. No single vendor right now, SASE vendor, offers everything, right? So you cannot easily replace your firewall, your DLP, your zero trust. Most of them offer zero trust network access. That's one of the pillars, but then it goes much deeper into that. So you're not going to be able right now to replace all of your local appliances or security appliances. But I would say it's maybe more attractive for SMBs, right? I'm trying to go back to SMBs because they seem to face the bigger challenges because they don't have the budget, they don't have the talent, they don't have the big security teams. They maybe have a few people who are doing also IT administration and security on top of it, right? So for them, this seems like very appealing, right? Because I offload that to whatever, the cloud vendor or the cloud partnership, whatever you want to call it, right? So then I just have to connect my branch office and the vendor is responsible for the security of the infrastructure, right? If all of my traffic goes through them, obviously there's the issues of latency and all that some companies like Cloudflare or Akamai or any of the big ones that have servers all around the world in all the major cities and that sort of thing are able to handle better than others, or Google or AWS but I would say, so that's appealing for SMBs.
For sure, due to the flexible packaging and due to the lack of the upfront costs. I mean, most of the enterprise solutions that we would need to stop the attacks happening in the SMB market are simply prohibitive. So, there is no way an SMB could afford the investments without, there is no way they could do that. That's why they're going to the MSPs. That's why the cloud is a very good solution for them. And
I think the security market in general should improve their offerings for SMBs. Because they seem to be focused on the big enterprises because that's where the big money is. That's where that gets you thousands and thousands of per seat licenses, big contracts, that sort of thing, right? But if you're a small shop or a small business that has, 30 employees, 20 employees, and you need to do, the job that you are dependent on IT, obviously, but you are now also facing the APT-style ransomware attacks, the APT-style cyber mercenary, the APT-style financially motivated cybercrime groups. We know groups like Carbanak, Cobalt, Fin6, Fin7, all those groups use APT style techniques. They come into your network, they sit on your network for months, they learn your workflows before they actually hit, right? So would you say, I don't know, in general, there should maybe be cheaper offerings for SMBs? Should the security industry do more? I'm talking about the security solutions industry.
I think definitely we will see more interest coming from the SMBs and them. I mean, just being an SMB, having 10 people doesn't mean, especially looking at worldwide, doesn't mean you can't do business for, you know, $100 to $1 billion, you know, in revenue. Just because you're small doesn't mean you don't have a significant impact. So I think definitely there is a need for different modern tools for those SMBs to solve their security challenges. It's not you can't just copy paste the enterprise model into the enterprise tools to this space.
What about governments? And this might be, you know, I've heard opinions, and this might be slightly controversial, right? But obviously, governments have offered companies financial assistance for dealing with COVID or revenue loss from COVID, mostly on the employee side. And we often hear, you know, the small businesses are the pillar of the economy, right? But when it comes to security, they lack the budgets, they lack everything. So some people are asking if governments care about the economy and the small businesses, they also security is not a revenue. It doesn't bring revenue, right? But it protects revenue, because if you do get breached, you might be put out of business. If you get a ransomware attack and you don't have cyber insurance, or the insurer refuses to pay, or anything like that, it's basically a business ending event, right? Or other big data breach, the loss of intellectual property, and so on and so on. So do you think, and this goes to everyone on the panel, not just you, do you think governments should have financial assistance programs for SMBs focused on improving their cybersecurity that would allow them to maybe buy better services, acquire better solutions, etc.? Like, I don't know, in agriculture, they have this financial assistance where they give money to farmers to buy new equipment, right, in order to increase their yields and their production, right? Why not for, you know, cybersecurity? What's your take on that?
I can start on that pretty quickly. I'm a big fan of free markets, so I don't think government intervention from this perspective is actually beneficial. I think if there is some government intervention, it should be more on the awareness and compliance. That's where they can do the most. And if I'm looking at SMBs in general, I think there is a lot of a huge lack of awareness. Their attention span, their management attention span on the cyber and IT issues is extremely limited, and it's unfortunately very reactive. So they are extremely interested in solving things very specific when they seem to have an issue or when they perceive a threat. Other than that, I think that we as a, you know, on the other hand, on the, you know, vendor side and security promoter side, we should work a lot on helping build those ROIs for security, which is very difficult to prove. But I think, in my opinion, this is the way forward.
Okay. Tudor, do you have some thoughts on that?
I totally agree. I think the awareness side is what's important here. And I've rarely seen a case where any sort of free money did anything good to help raise the importance of a certain thing. It's probably something that the companies would just take the money, take those resources, implement those things, not because they know they need them, but because it's there, and ending up not actually using those things as they should use those things. As opposed to, if they were aware of that need, if they were aware why that's needed and why that needs to be part of their business plan and their approach to how they do things daily, I think it would be much more relevant. So anything along the lines of raising that awareness and educating users and companies about the benefits of security in today's world would be of much bigger impact than any sort of funding.
But they don't have to be they don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? It doesn't mean that
if you're I don't want to go into the whole political discussion here, but if you're getting something for free, you don't perceive the value of that. And if you just get money to do something, as opposed to you realizing you need to do that something and you putting the effort and setting aside budget for that, the results are going to be very different. And that's across the board for any sort of giveaway versus something that I did myself, kind of a thing. It's the end results are visible, and that's why I also agree with Christian. I don't think that any sort of funding program for this would benefit the market at large. It would not educate the users in actually making use of that properly. It would be a waste of resources that could be put to better use in a different way. That's my opinion. And again, without going into the whole
right. And I have, I'm closer probably to the US market because of the publication I work for, and I speak with many, people in the US, experts in the US, and these issues came up more in the context of ransomware, right, where small businesses don't have many options there, right? So there were calls for the government should be doing more, including maybe financial assistance. So that's why I wanted to, throw the question out there, see where.
Yeah, I think it's a different mindset altogether. The way things are happening in the US as compared to Europe and Central and Eastern Europe in particular. So it's a whole different discussion. But I still do believe that awareness is more important. If those companies had known how to better protect themselves from ransomware, they wouldn't be in a position to have to pay up. So not as many. I'm not saying that they wouldn't have gotten hacked at all, but it wouldn't be as many, or it wouldn't be as widespread of a phenomenon.
Okay. Lucas, do you have any thoughts on that? Or
agreeing as well as we switch to since, as Hay just mentioned, that mentality of the US and comparing that to mentality in Europe, in Central or Eastern, it's totally different, and it might be misused. And the key should be education, awareness, starting maybe not with employees, starting with the schools to create employees that have that in mind, and that should be the first help for these SMBs.
Well, we're getting close to the end of the panel here, so I want to open it up for you guys to make some closing remarks, maybe about something that you wanted to say when we haven't covered with these questions that I had. Does anyone wants to start?
I actually have one thing that I really wanted to talk with you guys today, and it is about the number one thing that we're seeing being used in all the attacks that have happened throughout the last 2 years, and that is spear phishing and the initial coming in entry point, which is through the email. So I think if that's about probably 90% of the attacks have that component. So I think it's a really critical component that's not properly addressed by the entire market right now. If we take a look at the impacts, we've got companies from like top tech companies down to the SMB, governments, everybody's being attacked, and the initial attack vector is emails. So
yeah, very true. Most of the whether APT, whether ransomware, whether anything, spear phishing and phishing in general, is an ongoing problem and has been for many, many years. Obviously, that hasn't changed during the pandemic at all. If anything, has probably increased a
lot, hundreds of percent.
Tudor,
totally agree with Christian. And I think going back to his point in the beginning about security hygiene, it all boils down to that. It does go back to the user education and to helping users understand why they shouldn't use the same password everywhere. Because along with spear phishing, you've got password spraying, and you've got these huge password dumps all over the internet, where if you've got your account hacked on one site, but you're using the same password on 20 other sites, it doesn't matter how secure those sites are if you're not doing things right. So it all goes back to that. And that's the key here to becoming more aware of how technology impacts our lives, how privacy is everywhere in what we do every day, whether we're on social media and taking a photo and posting it on Instagram or reading a company email. It's everywhere. And until you understand that whatever affects you as a person also affects the company you work for in very much the same way, this is a problem that will not go away. And just a quick shameless plug, since it's related to the talk, I did mention I do have a zero trust session later on where I go into a bit more detail than what we managed to do during the panel for whoever is interested.
Right. And on the credential stuffing that you just mentioned, I want to quickly mention a big increase in attacks against APIs. So don't just think of it in terms of web application login forms, but now many applications have APIs, they communicate with each other via APIs, and there's many attacks against APIs because they have less protections than the traditional login forms. They don't have necessarily two-factor authentication, they use access tokens. So it's very important for companies to look at that and protect those tokens as well. Make sure they protect those tokens. Lukasz, do you have anything you want to add? Any closing remarks?
I would focus on mobile world, since we are having this social distance. And because of that, we spend more times cruising the internet, and it's super convenient to spend that time on our smartphone, on the big screens, on our tablets. And because of that, we might end up with bad apps, phishing, etc., being delivered through social media, watching videos, clicking on the links in comments, etc. Because of that, I believe we should think twice what we are doing, what we are tapping. And I believe our smartphones is having for the last year and a half more apps than before. So we should think twice when we download these applications. And I would suggest for users, before downloading any app, no matter which system you are using, check the permissions and read the review, read the comments from other users that downloaded the applications before, since there were bad apps found on these stores as well.
Okay. Well, I think we're out of time. I'd like to thank everyone on the panel for taking the time to come and share their insights with us and the community. And I'd like to thank the watchers, the viewers, sorry, not the watchers, the viewers for attending this panel. And I hope it was an engaging and interesting conversation. It's a very big topic. We could talk about it for hours and we wouldn't run out of issues and problems and challenges. But that's all of the time we have for today. I don't want to take more time from your lunch break. And thanks everyone. Andra, sorry. It's
no worries. There are two of us, and we're so similar. So don't worry. That's a compliment. I take it as a compliment. Thank you so much, Lucian. Thank you to everyone who participated in the panel for all of the lessons that you've shared. I think that people need examples to feel kind of less alone in their challenges. So many specialists in both IT and security have tried to in the past year, do their very best. And sometimes that feels like it's not enough simply because there's so much to do so fast. So I think that it's important to kind of practice a little self-compassion and self-empathy and figure out that everyone's doing their best, which I truly believe. So thank you so much to everyone.